After playing through every Soulsborne DLC, I've decided it's time to rank all of them to see which is truly the best. Whether it's the horrifying atmosphere of the old hunters, the bleak scenery of the Ring City, or the vibrant yet dark world of Shadow of the Erdtree. I'll be ranking the DLCs based on level design, atmosphere, and most importantly, their bosses. But before I get into the video, if you like Soulsborne content like this, then drop a like and hit subscribe. But if you don't want to do that, then that's also fine by me. Anyways, let's get into the ranking. At dead last, coming at the number 8 spot, we have Crown of the Sunken King. This DLC is in last place due to it having the worst bosses out of all the other Soulsborne DLCs. I mean, let's see, we have the Grave Robbers who are just an embarrassment of a boss fight, and I actually want whoever it is that thought of this to seek therapy, because what compelled them to make this shit? The other two bosses are also rather mid. You have Elena the Scaled Queen and Sin the Slumbering Dragon. Now, Sin is definitely the best out of the three, but anything will look better when compared to literal garbage. The level is something I'm not too big on as well. I'm usually not a fan of underground crypt-like levels in video games, but that's just my opinion. Overall, I think it's a mid DLC, and if it wasn't included in the Scholar of the First Sin edition, I would not imagine myself buying this. And here at number 7, we have another Dark Souls 2 DLC, Crown of the Ivory King. Now, this DLC isn't as bad compared to the Sunken King because it had two bosses that I enjoyed fighting, and the level itself was a bit better except for the frigid outskirts. Whoever thought of that needs to be locked up. Now, this is strange for me because I'm usually not a big fan of snow levels in video games, but this one is an exception since it's way brighter and prettier compared to most areas in the base game of Dark Souls 2. Now, the enemies can get a bit repetitive due to the lack of variety between them. It's mostly just these humanoid snowmen, and sure, some of them have crystals on their back preventing, backstabs, but overall they're pretty much the same. Now, the bosses themselves are just okay. The first one is Ava, who can turn invisible, but when I fought her, she didn't. So I must have triggered something without knowing, but Ava makes a great first encounter as a boss. Now, the second boss or bosses are the worst. First of all, they're in the frigid outskirts area, which again is one of, if not the worst Soulsborne level ever created. What makes it annoying is because you have these annoying bitch ass horse that will chase you forever. They're even annoying to fight head on, and second of all, you can barely see where you're going. But the boss fight itself with Lud and Zalin is just lame, as they're just a copy pasted version of Ava. Now, the final boss of the DLC is actually really good. It has great scenery and he makes a cool, engaging fight. The only issue that I have is with its first phase. It's a bit drawn out with the amount of enemies you have to face, but at least you can get other knights found throughout the DLC to help you. Overall, this is a decent DLC, but it only has 3 bosses and only 2 of them are good, which is the reason why it ranks super low. At number 6, we have Ashes of Ariandel. The Ashes of Ariandel DLC felt more like a quick short bonus level to satisfy your Dark Souls hunger because there's just not much going on here. The level remains the same in looks and overall feeling, and there's only 2 bosses. The Champion Gravetender, which is just one of the middest of mid bosses I've ever encountered, and Sister Frida, who to be fair carries this DLC on her back since she's really a good boss. Not my favorite, but I can definitely see why people love her. I mean, the fight with her is just cinematic. In her first phase she can turn invisible, which takes some getting used to, but once you get the patterns, it becomes the easiest phase. The second phase is where Father Ariandel revives Frida and joins the fight. This phase can be difficult if they're both together, but if you manage to separate Ariandel from her and focus only on him, then this part shouldn't be too much of an issue. Now, her third phase is the hardest as she dodges more often and has a lot of combos to pull off. She's just a great boss. Again, not my favorite, but definitely well designed. All in all, there isn't too much to say about the Ashes of Ariandel DLC. In my opinion, it felt like it was supposed to be in the base game but just got turned into a DLC for some reason. It's just a quick level, that's it. At number 5, we have Victorious of the Abyss. This DLC in terms of level design and traversal is actually my least favorite compared to all the other ones. The only reason why it's ranked 5th place and not last is because of the fact that for such a somewhat short DLC, we got 4 bosses to fight. 4 decent ones at that. First of all, you have the Sanctuary Guardian, who is definitely the most lackluster boss here in the DLC, but compared to the main game it stands out a lot. Its design is really cool, however I do hate the fact that it moves around a lot. The second boss we encounter is Knight Artorias himself, which makes a great fight. Compared to most other bosses in the game, he moves really fast and has some combos that can be a bit punishing. His appearance is also somewhat shocking, since in the base game a lot of people were glazing him, calling him a hero and how he stopped the abyss from spreading, but in reality he was corrupted by it. Sure, he did try to stop it, but it just didn't go as planned. The third boss encounter is actually a secret one, and it's Calamite. The reason why it's a secret is because you have to interact with Hawkeye Goth and let him shoot it down for you. Now the fight itself is actually decent, but similar to the Sanctuary Guardian when it comes down to movement, because this thing will not stay still, but it still makes a great dragon fight. The final encounter is with Monos, Father of the Abyss, and I know some people are gonna whine about how I pronounce the name, but whatever. He's definitely the hardest out of all 4 bosses, as he has some insane combos and his magic attacks do crazy damage, but I still find him fun to fight. Now when it comes on to the level design of the DLC, it's not the best. The first area felt a bit boring since it's just the same grassy landscape that's really similar to the Darkroot Garden, which makes sense since they're both in the same area, it's just that Ulasil takes place in the past. However, once you get to the township and the abyss area where all the humanities are floating around, it gets a bit more interesting. The NPCs are also really cool, and overall the DLC, while not having the best looking levels, definitely gets carried by the amazing bosses it has within it. At number 4 we have Crown of the Old Iron King. The reason why this DLC gets a way higher spot compared to the rest is because the level design is more interesting, and it also has 2 of my favorite bosses, that being Sir Alon and Fume Knight. Fume Knight is just a really fun fight. His run back is quite quick and the fight itself is just engaging because it's the right balance of challenging and fun. Sir Alon's boss fight is the same, however his run back is genuinely awful. And that's one thing I hate about the DLC, despite me liking it a lot. The enemy density felt crazy. It's like everywhere you go there is another gangbang of soldiers ready to kill you. But apart from that, the scenery, atmosphere, and bosses are enough to make me rank it this high on the list. At 3rd place we have the Old Hunters. I know some of y'all are really shocked seeing the Old Hunters only ranked at 3rd place, but don't get it twisted, this is still one of the best DLCs I've ever played. The scenery, the music, the bosses, everything about it is magnificent, and to be honest, I wouldn't be mad if someone placed this as their number 1 pick. But for me it stays at 3rd place. Let's start with the art direction and atmosphere. The Old Hunters takes place in the Hunter's Nightmare, which is this dark and twisted version of some of the areas that were in the base game, or at least areas that were mentioned in the lore. The base game of Bloodborne has its horror-esque moments, but the areas in the DLC really dials things up to 11. Now let's talk about the bosses. First up we have Ludwig the Accursed, who is one of the best bosses in the entire game of Bloodborne. His music, design, and atmosphere really makes him a super fun and engaging encounter. Oh, don't forget the lore behind him as well. The second boss encounter is a bit less exciting and memorable as it's just the living failures, but right after them you have Lady Maria, who is my favorite boss in the entire game. And after defeating her you get to explore the fishing hamlet, which plays a big part in the story of the DLC as it's where Gaemon and the other hunters killed Kos, which is a great one, and it's also where many people were slaughtered and dissected. And speaking of Kos, the final boss of the DLC is her orphan son, which to this day still makes a really challenging fight. The DLC also has my favorite weapon in the game, which is the Whirligig Saw. All in all, the bosses, atmosphere, and level design, while being super linear, much like the other DLCs I've mentioned, is still really fun to traverse and go back to even after beating the game many times. At number 2 we have the Ring City DLC. The Ring City DLC, like come on man, where do I even start? It was either between this or the Old Hunters, but I chose to give the number 2 spot to this instead. The design of the Ring City is gorgeous. Being in the city itself makes you feel like you're in the center of the world, which makes sense because the whole point of the DLC is to show that you are at the near ending of the world and everything is being sucked and drawn towards the center. There are even places from the old games that makes an appearance, the OG Firelink Shrine being one of them. The scenery and atmosphere is definitely one of the best parts of the DLC. There are also some new enemy types such as the Angels, the big guys with a giant hole in their chest, and the Ring Knights, to name a few. Now let's talk about the bosses. The first boss of the DLC is the Demon Prince. They both make an awesome duo fight that most people would even say outshine even Ornstein and Smo. After defeating both of them, one of them gets a power up and becomes even stronger than before. Overall this fight was pretty tough but still fun and engaging. The second boss is Medira, and most would consider him to be the best dragon fight in the entire Soulsborne franchise. However, there's another dragon boss that people are starting to say overtakes the spot. But Meteor is definitely a fun fight, tough as hell but still really good. The other two bosses are Half-Light and Gale. I'm not going to talk about Half-Light because he doesn't deserve any recognition, but Gale on the other hand is literally my favorite boss of all time. His moveset, arena, and sheer presence is why I like fighting him so much. He's so good that he made me decide to put the Ring City here instead of the old hunters. I've already went in depth about Gale in my ultimate boss ranking video. You can skip towards the ending if you want to know more about what I think of him as a boss. In essence, the Ring City DLC is truly amazing, and you can see as time goes by, FromSoft's games and DLCs keeps getting better and better. And at the number 1 spot we have Shadow of the Erdtree. This shouldn't be a surprise, this is literally art. First of all, one thing I've always had an issue with in FromSoft's previous DLCs is their length. Sure, on your first playthrough they might take you a super long time due to you getting stuck on the bosses, but on subsequent playthroughs they were a bit of a breeze and oftentimes feel like an extra throwaway level. However, Shadow of the Erdtree is basically its own game within a game. Instead of only having 3 or 4 new bosses, it literally has 10 main ones and some other mini bosses sprinkled around. The Land of Shadow, which is where the DLC takes place, is also really huge. Not as big as the main game, but close to it. Each area is also so beautifully presented, from the black and gold theme of the grave sites, to the vibrant blue of the Cerulean coast, to even the thunderous reddish hellscape of the jagged peak. Every area is so vastly different from each other while still giving the vibe of being in the same setting. Speaking of levels, I really love the Shadow Tree fragment system and how it works. Basically, there are 50 Shadow Tree fragments scattered around the entire map, and the more you collect, the more powerful your character becomes. It's very similar to finding prayer beads in Sekiro. This is also the main reason why the DLC feels like its own game, since you're basically at level 1 again and you have to explore the world in order to become more powerful. But unfortunately, this comes with its own set of issues. You see, as much as I love the new leveling system, I feel like there's definitely way too much Shadow Tree fragments that you have to find in order to level up, especially considering how spread out they are in the later parts. I wish they made it similar to Golden Seeds, where you can reach max level without having to find every single one of them. Now let's talk about the bosses, specifically my top 3 favorite ones, Rellana, Medra, and Mesmer. Rellana is a great boss. Sure, her jumping difficulty is a bit strange, but I think it's encouraged that you should go around her castle and explore some more before fighting her, because most people, including myself, encountered her around level 4, but it's way more comfortable fighting her at around level 8 to 10. But that aside, I've always loved sword wielding baddies, and I'm probably going to make a video ranking all of them since Rellana is a new addition. The next boss that I really enjoyed fighting was Medra. His design and cutscenes are super cool, and the OST playing sounds like it's from a horror film, at least the first part of it. His fight is also great due to his graceful yet deadly attacks. He's not super fast, but he definitely hits like a truck. The last boss I really loved was Mesmer. He's super fast paced but also not overbearing like some other bosses. His attacks, while feeling super hard to dodge at first, feels completely fair, and most of the time when I died to him, I knew it was because of my own fault. After a while, I started having fun dodging his combos. Bale, which is another boss, is considered by many to be their number 1 favorite dragon fight in the entire series due to his difficulty and presence. While they have some other great bosses in the DLC, those are the ones that stood out to me the most. If you're interested in me ranking all the Shadow of the Erdtree bosses from worst to best, you can check out this video right here. But overall, Shadow of the Erdtree is the best Soulsborne DLC in my opinion, and it's also the best DLC I've ever played due to the amount of fun content it has inside of it. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you like more content like this, then leave a like and hit subscribe. Only if you genuinely want to see something, more stuff like this, cause I'm not forcing you. Hope you guys have a good one.